Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Luis Chavez. I'm a photographer and filmmaker based out of Southern California, and in today's video I want to talk about my editing process. I know a lot of people don't like to get into that, especially photographers, but to me editing is just a part of the process for photography. It's not like the main thing. So whether it's the composition or the cropping or the way that the shot is framed, all of those aspects are equally as important. So the editing work that I do in post is just like an extra thing, and I don't think that, for me at least, for my channel, I don't want anybody to think that photography is this unattainable thing that only a certain amount of people can do. I want to inspire people with this channel to pursue photography, and if that's what they want to do, and so it doesn't feel like this is this really difficult thing that people with a certain kind of skills have. You do have to hone in those skills and kind of see what looks good to your eye, but I just kind of want to go through what my process specifically looks like. So I use my iPad for most of my personal work. So if it's anything that I do every day or that I post on Instagram, maybe follow me on Instagram, it all happens on this iPad. Whenever I do more commercial type shoots or weddings or sessions, like stuff like that, I use my iMac for that. But for like my leisure shooting, I kind of just like to keep it as simple as possible. So I use Lightroom for iPad. So right on my iPad, I have all the raw files. So you're not losing a lot of functionality that you would on like a desktop or an iMac. So for instance, I picked a bunch of different photos here. So it goes from all the cameras that I use. So the two cameras that I use is the Ricoh GR3 and the Leica Q2. And I also shot with the X100V from Fuji in the month of September. So I'll have some of those files on here too. So what I use to edit my photos is actually some Lightroom profiles. And if you're not familiar with Lightroom profiles, they're a little bit different than presets. And just full disclosure, I'm not being paid to say this. I just didn't even get this for free. I paid full price for this. It's Lightroom presets by the Archetype project. And what these profiles do is they emulate film stocks. So if you're familiar with shooting film, these kind of colors will be a little familiar to you. So for my personal work, I like to have my edits be as simple as possible, just to kind of keep the look of the picture intact, and then just play around with the exposure or with a little bit of different colors. But I like a nice base right when I start editing here. So if you click here onto my Lightroom profiles, there's a bunch of different ones, and then the ones I use from the Archetype project is Kodak Pro, and that emulates Kodak film stock. So Archetype 100, Portra 160, Portra 400, Portra 800, and then different variations of that. But I usually just stick with the standard one. So my most used ones I favorite, and I just keep right in the front so I can just get to them very quickly. So the ones I use the most is Portra 400 and Portra or Kodak 160. So just for the sake of the video, I'll just start here into the actual Kodak profile. So I look down here and I pick the one from a Portra 400 with a Frontier Noritsu scanner. I don't know that much about film, and I'm kind of learning a little bit. So I know the different scanners give you different color shifts or different color tones. So I usually just do with Noritsu. That's my favorite one that I've used here. And then once I pick it, the first thing that happens is usually brings the whole exposure down. So I like to bring that up just a little bit. So if you bring up the exposure just a little bit here, it kind of already starts to look like something. And like I said, with these profiles, I actually don't do much because I'm more concerned about the composition and less about the edit, if that makes any sense. But the way that I shot this photo was a little crooked, so I do crop my photos quite a little bit. I know not everybody's really into cropping of photos, but I'm not always the best at composition on the fly. So I like to go in and crop things after the fact. So this picture was taken with that Ricoh GR3, and as you can see here, you can see the settings that I use. So 1/1250 of a second, f2.8 at ISO 100. And as you can see here, it looks pretty good already. Usually I tend to lean more into the warmer side of things. So I usually fix the temperature a little bit on the white balance. So just a couple things here. I usually don't do much, like I said. And then to me, this looks great. I usually lean more into the magenta side. So sometimes I add a little bit magenta into my photos just so they look a little bit different. And yeah, so this looks great to my eye. If anything, I might bring the exposure just a little bit up and then bring the highlights down just so to retain some of that detail. And yeah, I think that's it for me on this photo, but you can do a bunch of stuff here. One other thing that I tend to do is do the color mix. So I tend to lean more into the hues for the grass and stuff like that, more into like the blue greens than to the yellows. So I usually move it to a little bit to the right here, just so it doesn't look super unnatural. I usually don't do it too much. So for this specific photo, the thing that pops the most is this house. So I'll probably change the blue a little bit, just so it looks a little bit nicer to my eye, and then the hue a little bit. And then the other thing I do is I bump up the saturation. So here on this blue, I like to just change the saturation just a little bit, just to make it pop a little bit more. And yeah, so I think this photo is done for the most part. So this is before and after with, like I said, these profiles. So before, after, and that's good to me. And that's how I would leave it and how I would post it. So for the next photo, it's this other photo here that I took in August. We went camping, so I took a nice photo of our campsite. So again, I go right into my Lightroom profiles here on Lightroom, and then I just pick whichever looks good. And if you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different looks. From Archetype 100 to 160, 400, and so on and so forth. But like I said, I usually just stick to Portrait 400. Sometimes I go here to Portrait 160, just if I want a little bit different look to it. And for the sake of this photo, let's just go to Portrait 160 here. And again, it usually brings the whole exposure down of the photo. So the only thing I would do is bring up the exposure just a little bit, bring down the highlights, and then change the white balance, because like I said, I lean a little bit more towards a little bit warmer tones and to a little bit more magenta. So just with the different things that we're doing here, it's already looking pretty good. The one thing that I would do is probably bring up the shadows just a little bit, just so they're not crushed. I usually don't change the blacks all that much, and the one other thing that I change sometimes is the clarity. So for me, I mostly shoot film digital for all my personal work. So sometimes digital sensors, and I know this is gonna sound silly, but sometimes for digital sensors, there's too much sharpness in the images. So I like to soften them up just a little bit, especially when I do landscapes or even portraits, to be honest. So I go here into the effects panel and I bring down the clarity just a little bit. So -10%, and then I dehaze it just a little bit, just to still have that punch of contrast. And yeah, so for me, that looks pretty good. I probably bring up the highlights just a little bit so they're not entirely like look unnatural. So one more thing that I would do, and that I do with a lot of my photos, I would crop it in here. And yeah, that looks good to me. I think it's a pretty simple edit. And so if you look at here, this is the before and this is the after. So again, I don't do much to my photos. I like to keep them as natural as possible without looking like I did so much to the photo that it doesn't look like the same thing. So again, for this other photo here, it's of Big Bear Lake. So this photo is already a little underexposed because I wanted to retain those highlights. So if you go here to Portrait 400 again, and the cool thing about Lightroom profiles is that whenever you select a profile, you can also change the intensity of them. And it's not just for these Archetype project Lightroom profiles, it's with any Lightroom profile, you can change the intensity here. So I usually just keep them right at 100%. Let's go back to Portrait 400, and then I bring up the exposure here. We can see just bring everything nice and even, and then I just bring back the highlights because I want to retain that. Sometimes I bring down the exposure just a little bit and then just bring up the shadows. And yeah, this looks great to me already. I wouldn't do much different actually. Again, I would probably just warm it up a little bit. That's too much. just so it's nice and even. And again, I dehaze it a little bit, and this is just the way I do it. There's no, for me at least, there's no right or wrong way to do this. So this is the way I would do it. Because you can also go here into actual contrast and just change it, you know, bring it all the way up or all the way down. So I usually keep it right in the center, or I usually put, you know, +5, and this looks pretty good to me, honestly. And so this is the way that I would probably keep it at, you know, and it's still, you know, with Lightroom for the iPad, you still retain a lot of that same functionality that you do with desktop, but, you know, you get the ability to do with touchscreen or with the Apple Pencil. So this is the way I like to do it. Another photo here, and just so we can do a variety of them. So this is from the Fuji X100V. I took this photo in Colorado. It's a little overexposed, but that's okay. So again, I will go, let's say here for Archetype Frontier 100. It's a little intense to me. So I would probably do Portrait 160 here, just because it looks pretty nice to me. And honestly, let's try Portrait 400, just for the sake of it. And actually that looks better. So Portrait 400 looks great. Again, bring up the exposure just a little bit, and then the highlights just a little bit lower, just to bring back some of those details. Sometimes they kind of look unnatural, with, especially if the sensor doesn't have the best dynamic range, or if, like myself, you don't shoot it right sometimes. So yeah, so this is the way I would edit it. Since the big draw to this photo to me is the yellows in these leaves, I would probably mix the color a little bit. So I would bring this here, saturate it a little bit. So I would pick this and bring up the saturation right here. And it's a little intense, but I'm kind of into it for this picture because it's kind of like the big draw. And I kind of wanted to bring up the exposure a little bit higher. So, I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, these might be a little bit different from what I posted, but I'm just editing these from scratch again, and it changes from time to time. So yeah, this looks great to me. I don't think I would change anything else. This was shot with a Pro Mist filter, so I don't need to bring down the, what's it called? The clarity for this, because it's already a little bit softer. So yeah, this is the before and after. So before and after, and then maybe what I would do is crop it just a little bit to make sure that this my subject's right in the center. And yeah, this is the way I would probably keep it. So that looks great to me. So let's do another photo. This one's at nighttime, and just so you can see kind of like the profiles that I use in different scenarios. So this was shot at night at ISO 200, and you can see all my settings here. I don't need to go over them. So profile, again, I can see all of the different profiles here. And I mean, with night shots like this, I can be a little bit more, I can change things up a little bit more. So Portrait 160, so it looks pretty good to me already, just by just one click. And besides, it's nighttime, so everything brought back down, all those highlights. So I do bring them up just a little bit, just so it's not crazy. But I do bring down the blacks, just so I don't bring all that noise back into the image. And yeah, I mean, that's about it, honestly. For whenever I compose for Instagram, or whenever I pose on Instagram, the only thing that I change is the aspect ratio. I do 4:3, just personal preference for my Instagram, but whenever I edit that, I make sure to keep an original 2, because I also like to have just a 3:2. And yeah, so that looks good to me. I wouldn't change anything else. And that's a before and after. So yeah, maybe I would bring up the exposure just a little bit, but that looks good to me. So moving on here, let's do something, let's do this picture of City Hall, and I had already started doing some edits on here. So this is the original picture that I took in City Hall. This is Pasadena City Hall, and this is shot on the Leica Q2. And so again, I always start with a profile, and I know it's already going to bring down the exposure, so I don't do anything before I put on the profile. So Portrait 400 here, and again, it's bringing everything back down. So I bring everything back up in post right here for the exposure. I bring down the highlights just a little bit, and then I bring up the shadows, just so we can get some of that, detail that you kind of miss when I took this photo. So, you can't really tell that there was a dog here and then there was people passing by. And then what I would do here is bring up the temperature, because it was a little bit later. And so I would probably bring it a little bit warmer, just a personal preference. There's no right and wrong way to do this. This is the way I would do it. I like my images a little bit warmer, so here's a little bit more warm, and then a little magenta here onto the tint. Bring up the temperature just a little bit more, and that looks good to me. So what I would do here is, again, I would go to the effects panel, bring down the clarity just a little bit, dehaze it just a little bit higher, just to bring that pop of contrast back in without having all that sharpness in here. So yeah, this would be a finished image. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with the way it's composed. Maybe a little bit on the horizon here, but I think it's fine. Yeah, that looks good to me. I've been doing this thing where I just try to put stuff in the foreground and the background just so to give it a little more depth, and especially for my more wide shots. So this is an image I took a couple weeks ago, so pretty happy with it. So here we go. So this is a before and after. This is before, this is after. Pretty happy with it, so it's ready to go. So here's another image that I had already edited, but we're gonna start all over. So here again, profiles, and then let's do Hectare 100. That looks good to me. What I would do here is I would recompose, or I would crop it just a little bit. I'm not too happy with the way that I shot this originally, so we'll bring this back in, just so the focus of this photo is just on this bar and grill sign here, leading to this portrait. It's not the most it's not traditionally the way that people compose for this type of stuff, but it looks pretty cool to me. So I usually like to just play around with things just to see what sticks. Just trying to get better at composing. So right here is just this profile brings everything back down, so I don't have to worry too much about the exposure. I've tried to nail it as much as possible in camera, and since I like to retain those highlights, I usually underexpose. So right here, it's pretty good to me already. I would play around with the color just a little bit to see what it looks like. I always bring up the temperature just in case I like it more. Let's leave the tint there. I think it looks pretty good here. I bring down the clarity a little bit, dehaze. Sometimes I play around with the color, like I said, but since the big color here is these oranges, I like to play around with them here, the hues as well, just to see where it goes. And I do like them a little bit on the warmer side. And then I'd bring up the saturation just a little bit, just to give it that nice pop of color, since the big thing on this image is the brick and this wall here that's all in the same orange huey side. And then sometimes I bring down the luminance of the colors that are on my photos, so I bring this down just a little bit. See, those minor adjustments sometimes make a big difference, sometimes they don't. But I think for the sake of this photo, it looks pretty good to me. So yeah, can't decide how I would like to crop it, but for the sake, this video is getting long already. So yeah, this would be the way that I would edit the photo. Again, it's more about the composition and less about the way that I'm editing the color in post. So yeah, this is a before and after on my image with the Archetype process Lightroom presets or profiles. So the last photo I will talk about here, it'll probably be this one, because especially for me, whenever I take photos, sometimes, let's go to the original here. I take a photo and then after the fact, that's when I recompose it, if that makes any sense, especially with the Leica Q2, because it has the big sensor. And I know that for a lot of people, cropping in is kind of cheating for images, but I like to think of it as just kind of bringing an image that I wasn't super pumped about, some new life. So for this photo in particular, if you saw my Instagram post, I did switch the aspect ratio to 4:3, and then I switched it to like a portrait kind of composition, and I cropped in quite a bit actually. So if you looked at my Instagram, it's like this much. And then I bring in I kind of adjust the horizon here, and then I go back and I go through my Lightroom profiles, and I don't remember which one I used for the one I just posted, but let's just, for the sake of all my pictures, it's Portrait 400. I bring up the exposure just a little bit, actually a whole lot, and I bring the temperature just a little bit, just so it's a little bit warmer. It was pretty late in the day, so it's pretty warm still out. And then I bring up the tint just a little bit, and this is the way that I edited the photo. It's pretty fast actually. Like I said, it doesn't take all that long, but this photo I wasn't initially that pumped about, but with the extra crop that I did with the picture, it kind of made me like the photo even more after the fact. So, you know, for those of you who are afraid to crop in your photos, I mean, the Leica Q2 has that sensor that allows you to crop in a lot, but for pictures like these, that require just tweaks here and there, I think it's okay to crop, honestly. You know, I mean, they're your photos. As long as you like them, that's all that matters. So like I said, this is the before and after for this photo, and if I can go back to my original photo, this is the way it looked like. And actually, to go back to the beginning, it actually looked even more different. So here, and let's get rid of that crop. And this is the way that the photo originally looked like. So play around with your crops too. It doesn't need to be like shot right in camera, as perfect as possible. And then don't be afraid to kind of recompose your images in post if that's what you're into. So for the last photo I'm gonna talk about is this photo of this fence that I was really into. So I shot this photo, and I really like the way that these lines kind of draw your eye into this hoop. So I took this photo, and again, with everything I'm talking about, don't worry too much about the way that you're doing it in camera, and just if you want to play around in it in post. Let's do it here. So profile, I usually do, let's do Ectar 100, because I'm pretty sure that's the one I use for this. So Ectar 100 brings down the whole exposure down, so bring it up here in post, and if you are happy with the color, I'm pretty happy with this, bring it up just a little bit, a little bit of the tint here, and then I would crop it in just a little bit, just there's too much fence here on the left side. And yeah, I mean, that's the way I would do it. It's not too crazy, and again, be more mindful of your compositions more than anything, and then just kind of go crazy with the color if that's what you're into. But for me, I like to keep it nice and simple and to just emulate film more than anything, because I'm kind of starting to get into film, and I'll do a video about that too. But as of right now, all my stuff is on digital. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys who were interested in the way that I edit my photos. Again, by all means, check out these Lightroom profiles. I'm not sponsored by them or getting paid. I didn't get these for free. This is just what I use for my personal images and what I've been really enjoying to edit on my iPad and on my desktop. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye.